Hello there, and welcome back to a Minecraft tutorial. In this episode, I'm gonna show you kind of the solutions I came up with when I challenged myself. So basically, I realized that a lot of logic gates in Minecraft involve either torches or pistons or both. That's redstone torches or pistons or both. And yeah, they're probably the simplest way to go, but I decided I was going to see if I could redesign all of the basic gates, all the basic logic gates, without using a single redstone torch or a single piston. And I did. As you can see, some of them are a little more complex, some of them are simpler, but a lot of them, actually all of them except one I think, uses comparator logic to make this work. So again, these are not the most efficient designs. If you want the most efficient, use the standard ones with the redstone torches and all that. These are just, for whatever reason, if you don't want to use a redstone torch, or in my case, just to see if I could, just as a personal challenge. Alright, so I'm going to take you through all of these one by one and explain how they work. And to show you how to build them, they're all at most too high, so I can just, look down on them and show you how to build them, and you can pause the video and follow it yourself. But we're going to start with the easiest one, which is an OR gate. In Minecraft, the simplest OR gate is just to run two redstone lines together. So if you have two inputs, you have A here and B here, B here, and you want A or B, you literally just run them together, and that will be A or B. So if A is on, or B is on, or both, then the output is on. Otherwise it's off. Right? Simple. But if you want it more of a gate form for whatever reason, if you don't want to merge your lines, you can just replace them with a block with repeaters going into them. So this is input A, and this is input B. And if A or B or both are on, then you get this output on. So very simple, simple to understand, simple to build. It's never needed anything more than that before. So the only reason I included this is because it is one of the basic logic gates, so why not? Moving on, the Exor gate. This is not my design. I don't remember where I found this. It might have been the Minecraft wiki, but this is the Exor design I use all the time. This is actually what inspired me to try to build the rest of them with just comparator logic and stuff like that. But this is an XOR gate. Now what an XOR gate means is it's exclusive OR. So if you turn one on, then the output, which in this case is coming out of these comparators, is on. If you turn the other on, the output is on. If they're off, then the output is off. But unlike an OR gate, if they're both on, the output is also off. And so the way this works is you have your inputs that both go into these comparators in the back. And so if these are on, right, then the comparators will output a signal, right? So it gets on. However, each of these inputs is also connected to the side of a repeater, of a comparator, and these are set to subtract mode, as you can tell by the bottom torch being on. And what that means is when you turn these on, each one will disable its side. So in this case, if I turn the right one, let's turn this one off. If I turn the right one on, it will power the back of these comparators, but it will also disable the right comparator. If I turn the left one on, it will power the comparators, but it will also disable the left comparator. So when you turn them both on, they both disable their comparators, and so you get no output. So yeah, exclusive OR, when one or the other, but not both, is on, then the output is on, otherwise it's off. And then from here on, the rest are my designs. They're not too difficult, except for maybe that last one, but yeah. So this is an AND gate. Normally, the AND gates are, as I showed in a previous video, where you have 3 blocks like that, and then you have your torches here, some redstone dust in between, and your torch back here. And then you just run your inputs into the sides of there, right? So if they're both on, it'll turn both torches off, which will finally turn the dust off, and then that will turn the light on, right? So that's how the normal standard torch AND gate works, but since I challenged myself to build it without torches, I came up with this design. So this can be any power source right here, as long as it's really anything. I was going to say as long as it's full strength, but yeah, as long as it's full strength. And then, so this, both comparators are on subtract mode, and then this comparator leads into the side of this comparator, and then your inputs lead one into the back of this comparator and one into the side of this one. So basically what happens is if they're both off, then this side is off, and since this is where the power is coming from for this comparator, the output is off. But if you just turn this one on, while this is powered, it's also getting subtracted 15 from here, or 15 is getting subtracted from here, which is disabling it, so the output is still off. If I turn just this one on, it'll disable this, so it's not getting subtracted, but again, there's still no power, so it's still off. But if they're both on, then the output is on because this is getting disabled, so nothing is getting subtracted from here, and you're getting a full power in the back, so you get full power out the front. So yeah, comparator AND gate here. And in this case, you do need to use repeaters, just because if you use redstone dust or something, it will, if you use like redstone dust, it'll interfere with each other, so one input will actually turn the other on. And unfortunately with comparators, you can't like run a signal into a block and have that act as a side input. It just won't work. I don't know, it's just the way comparators work, unfortunately. So repeaters. And so this little square here gets you your AND gate. Then you've got a NOT gate. Now the simplest way to do a NOT gate is just a block and a torch, and that's literally it. So if you were to put an input here, when it's on, the torch is off. When it's off, the torch is on. That's what torches are designed to do, is be a NOT gate. But again, the challenge was without any torches, and it's actually pretty simple. You just put a full strength signal behind your comparator, put it in subtract mode, and then run your input into the side. And if this is not right next to it, you could put a repeater there if you wanted to. It would need to be a full strength signal at the end, so you definitely do need either a repeater or the input directly here. But when this is on, that's off. When that's off, that's on. And obviously all it's doing is subtracting 15, or so subtracting the signal from 15, which inverts it. Okay, and now we come to some of the more complex ones. This is a latch. So the way a latch works is you turn one input on, and it turns one side on, and it stays on. And then no matter what, even if you turn that input off, it will stay on. But then if you turn another input on, it'll shut the whole thing off, and it'll stay off. And the usual way to do this is with torches, again. And you basically do something like this, where you have one torch inverter leading into another torch inverter. And so now if I have a signal here, it turns that on and it stays on no matter what I do. But if I have, oops, I'm not going to want that there. If I have a signal here, then it turns that off and it stays off no matter what I do, right? And so that's the usual way to do it, but again, we're going torch free for this, and we can do that with some comparator logic. So let me get rid of this example and come to this one. So for this latch, all we really need to do is take a comparator and run it back into itself through a repeater. And so this block here is very important. If you don't have this block here, then that redstone dust will connect to the side input of this comparator, and you're going to get a clock instead, which is not what you want. So this block just raises the redstone dust up so that it doesn't actually interfere with that. But otherwise, it's a very simple loop. And so what happens is, if I turn this on, it's going to stay on, because once the signal comes through here, it will come through this repeater, and then through this comparator, and it'll come back around and then power itself, and it will stay on no matter what you do. However, if you flip this switch, it will turn it off, and it will stay off no matter what you do, because this comparator's in subtract mode, and your input is 15. So you're subtracting 15 from 15, which is 0, so it turns it off. And then once this turns off, there's nothing feeding back into itself, so it stays off. So yeah, so that is how you do a latch with no torches, just comparator and a repeater. And that's it. And some redstone dust, obviously. And then here is the more complicated one, or I should say the most complicated one of the bunch. This is a T flip-flop using no pistons and no torches. I get the feeling there's possibly an easier way to do this, but this is the only way I could think of, and it works perfectly, so I'm just going to stick with it. So what a T flip-flop does is, whenever it gets a pulse of redstone, or whenever you turn the redstone on, it switches states. So if I turn it on and it's off, it'll turn on and stay on. If I turn it on again, so turn it off and then turn it back on, then it'll turn off and stay off. And so the usual way to do this that I've seen is, so there are two ways to do it. One common way is to use a piston, specifically actually two pistons, and power them both at the same time with a short pulse, with a block, redstone block in between. And what that ends up doing is, one will retract while the other will extend, and it will cause them to sort of fight for who gets the block. And that ends up making it flip back and forth between two states. And so you'll get like a redstone block moving between two spots, and then you can just take an output from that. But that uses pistons and torches, because you need the torches to get that, to power them both with a pulse. Another way to do it that doesn't use torches, or sorry, that doesn't use pistons, is, let me see if I can rebuild this from memory. Basically, it uses repeater locking to delay a signal from a clock so that it doesn't reach itself until the next time, it doesn't toggle itself until the next time it gets a pulse. So it's basically like this, and yep, that'll be fine. And then we take the output from here and lead it back into itself, and you'll see right here, if you just leave it going, it's a clock. But then what you do is you put a torch here, and this is your input. And it actually doesn't work with a, yeah. So you can see what's going on here. Every time you turn this on, it switches state. So it goes off, it's off now, so it turns on, etc. And all it's really doing is it's flipping back and forth between locking this one and locking that one. And so it sort of delays the signal and holds the signal up here. So after it oscillates, it gets stuck here until the next time you flip the switch, which allows the signal through one oscillation, which acts as a flip-flop. But you'll notice this has two torches in it, so obviously this is not appropriate for this challenge. So, without any torches, it becomes a lot more difficult. So basically what I did was I combined that NOT gate here to replace a torch, and then I used a comparator clock instead of that torch clock. And then I had to make sure that the input was always a pulse, so I used a little comparator repeater pulse limiter here to limit the pulse down to 2 ticks no matter how long your input is. And the result is a T flip-flop. So that is the output, and this is the input. So if I flip this, it switches to on, it stays on. I flip it, it switches to off, it stays off, and yeah. So let me try to run through that in a little more detail. So what I have here is a dropper with a single item in it. It doesn't matter what this is, as long as it's an inventory that has more than one slot, really. You just need an inventory that will produce a signal less than 15, 14, 13, 12. 12 or less. You have to be able to produce a signal of 12 or less. So one stackable item inside a dropper will do that. So that's what I'm using. And then you take the comparator output from that and put it in subtract mode. You run that into a repeater, and then you run the redstone dust back around. And that's going to make a clock. So if I take this repeater out, you'll see it's just a clock. It's constantly pulsing back and forth because it's outputting some small value, I think 1, getting boosted to 15. By the time it gets around here, it's 12, but now you have 1 minus 12, which is less than 0. So that turns it off. But then when it turns off, now it goes back to 1, and then it repeats. So this gets you the clock that's similar to that torch clock that I have there, and now all we need is a way to open it up, or to disable it, and then to enable it for enough to oscillate once and then stop. So we use repeater locking for that. So we have this output, and we have this repeater here, locking this so that it stays in one state. And then we have this comparator in subtract mode and this redstone block here. And this is where our input goes. So this is the NOT gate that I showed you right there. So this is just an inverter. So whatever our input is will get inverted, and that will be used to lock this. So basically when our input turns on, it will turn off this, so it will unlock the repeater here and allow the clock to run. When our input turns off, it gets inverted, locks this, and freezes the clock wherever it is. So now all we need to do is make sure that the pulse size, or the input length, never goes longer than 1 clock cycle. And so for that, we use this little design, which is not my own design, but I don't remember whose it was, where I saw it. It's very useful. It makes a very short pulse without using any torches or pistons or anything. It is not a 1-tick pulse, it is a 2-tick pulse, but it works perfectly for something like this. And it's completely silent, so that's good. And basically, the input goes into this comparator. It also goes into this repeater, which comes back into the side of the comparator. But this repeater is on 2 ticks. So what happens is, for 1 tick, we get the input coming through here. And then 2 ticks later, we get this turning on, which comes into the side, gets subtracted, and then ends up turning the output off. And as long as the input is on, that will stay on. So it cuts this off, disables it, so you only get 2 ticks of output. So the first tick from going through, and then the other tick of while this is waiting, and yeah. If you put this on 1 tick, it does not make a 1-tick pulse, it just doesn't make a pulse at all. So if we look, basically it's a race condition where there's 1 tick of delay from the comparator normally, and then so if you put 1 tick of delay there, by the time this updates, it actually is already being disabled. But you do get a 2-tick pulse from this, which then gets inverted as the locking mechanism. So then it unlocks this for 2 ticks, which is just long enough, because of the delay between these two, to run a clock cycle and toggle the output. And that's how we get ourselves a T flip-flop using no redstone torches and no pistons. Alright. So these are my basic gates, using no redstone torches, no pistons. Again, these aren't necessarily the optimal way to do things, especially not for like a NOT gate or an OR gate. Those are simple stuff. They're not the most efficient ways, but they are ways that do not involve the usual redstone torches or pistons, which means that in some cases they may actually be more suited to your uses, depending on what your uses are. So, until next time, keep comparing.